So in this lecture, I will be talking about evolution, the different scientists who gave this concept of evolution, and ultimately we will be talking about the theory that was given by Darwin. So before these theories came into effect, there was a belief around the world in different religions that it was God who made all the organisms, animals, plants, and all the natural things. And it was also believed that Earth was somewhere around 4,000 years old. However, when these investigations were started, so scientists around the world, they had a different understanding. They developed a different kind of notion, and altogether these theories were led to the evolution of new theories, which was later kind of compiled by Darwin. So let's see. So some of the early ideas were evolution that scientists, they propose different ideas. So what evolution is, that evolution is a process of biological change by which descendants come to differ from their ancestors. So initially the organisms could look a little bit different. However, passing through thousands of years, it is quite possible that these organisms may differ from their original ancestors. So there were other scientists. It's not only Darwin who has come up with this particular idea of evolution. Some initial, like before Darwin, some other scientists, they also developed this kind of idea. So there were four important scientists which were involved in this particular theory of evolution. So one of the initial persons was Carolus Linnaeus. So he developed classification of the living organisms. So he grouped the organism on the basis of the similarities that they have. So he published a book named Systema Naturae. So in this he reclassified different organisms on the basis of similarities that could be visualized from outside. So there was another scientist named Buffon. So he proposed that the species, they shared common ancestors in place of arising separately. So in his published work, he showed that some of the organisms, they have similar kind of characteristics. So here you can see in this particular image, the jaguar and cougar, they have a similar kind of appearance which resembles to the cat family. So he developed a notion, a feeling that the organisms, they have not originated separately. So they might have some common ancestors. And it is on the basis of space, or on the basis of the region where these organisms are surviving, some of the features might have evolved. Some of the features they might have changed. The third important scientist was Erasmus Darwin. So he was Darwin's grandfather, and he proposed that all living things, they were descended from a common ancestor. So he published his book called Zoonomia, and where he has the laws of organic life. So he said that the organisms, they have not evolved from different ancestors. These organisms, they have some kind of common ancestor. So it is through the process of evolution, through the thousands, hundreds of years, that these organisms, they have changed. So those changes, they could have been because of the environmental factor or because of the availability of other natural resources. So the fourth important scientist was Lamarck. So he proposed theory that all organisms evolved towards perfection and complexity. So it is his belief that the organisms, they could have been having common ancestors, but depending on how the natural conditions have changed and what are the availability of the resources to them, the organism could have matured to perfection. So it is quite possible that initially the organisms, the ancestor may look a little bit different, However, the upcoming generations or the present generation organisms, they may be different. And those organisms, they could have evolved with the time towards the perfection and complexity. So initially, the organisms could be having several lacuna. However, as the time progressed, these organisms could have overcome those lacuna and could have reached to the perfection stage. Or in a way, one can say that those conditions which could facilitate their survival. So he gave a couple of examples of giraffe. So initially, one can see in the pictures that he has shown that initially the neck was not that long. However, with the availability of the food, since the giraffe was supposed to grab food from the taller plants, the neck was stretched out. So it was the organismal behavior towards the natural surrounding. So his theory proposed changes in environment caused an organism behavior to change, leading to greater use or disuse of a structure or organism. So it was quite possible that depending upon the natural condition, the organism's body structure may change. So either some of the organisms could be more functional or some of the organisms could be less functional. So organisms then they can pass on these traits from one generation to another. So this is how the organisms could have adapted to the environment and could have become more suitable or could easily survive to the conditions that were prevailing. So there were a couple of theories of geological change. So at that time there was belief that the earth may be somewhere around 4,000 years old. So it was different scientists, they were coming up and they started talking about the age of the earth. So many thought that the earth was just 6,000 years old. However, when different kind of fossils were discovered, then the controversy started. So those fossils, they were more older than the 6,000 years. So if the fossils are more older, it means that the earth could be even more old as compared to the fossils. So one of the eminent scientists at that time, Hutton, he proposed that earth is very old. So he was unable to estimate the age of the earth, and he said that the geological change occurred gradually. So he gave the concept of gradualism, that the earth structure might have changed over the longer duration of time. It's not that the earth is just 6,000 years old. Over the longer duration time, the surface of the earth has changed. So initially it could have been water and rocks, and then eventually came the soil surface. And onto that soil surface, different organisms, including plants, animals, they could have come up. So that change could have come up gradually over some thousands of years. So he also supported the theory that Earth is more older as compared to the belief of 6,000 years old. And this change onto the Earth's surface has been gradual. So another eminent scientist, Lyell, he published Principles of Geology. So that book, he also says that Earth must be very old. He said the changes in the Earth occurred at constant rate over time. So he also proposed that the changes have been constantly going on to the Earth surface. So this similar kind of change, which has been done over the 100 years, 100,000 of years, these kind of changes we keep on seeing even today. So these different kind of theories, they were there in place. So that could have affected the Darwin's thinking at that particular time. So Darwin observed different species. So he has a chance to travel all around the world. So he traveled around the South America, into the different islands. So here was one of the prominent area here, which is Galapagos Islands. So here he studied different kind of species. So he collected different specimens. So here one of the species that is collected was the different kind of lizards there. The another species were the birds that he could collect. So he managed to get onto this HMS Beagle ship, and it traveled all around the world, covering right from New Zealand, Australia to Cape of Good Hope, and ultimately going towards the Galapagos Island. So over the years, Darwin managed to collect thousands of specimens. So he started observing different specimens collected all around the world and started to identify the similarities. So he could manage to identify the structural similarities that could existed between the different organisms. So he noticed that the variation they were well suited to anyone's environment. So he observed that there was this the small different islands were there, and onto those three different islands, he could identify different structure of turtles. So in these turtles, you could see that although the basic structure remains the same, however, they have some kind of differences. So if we see this particular turtle here, which is on the Isabel Island, so here the back of this is dome-shaped shell as compared to the saddle back on the Hood Island. And on the Pinta Island, this structure was a little bit different. Also, the size of the neck, it was different altogether in all the three species, on the three organisms. So it was quite evident that in this Isabel Island, the availability of moisture, the humidity was quite high, because of which the vegetation was good. The plants and the vegetation which was surviving on the ground was little low. So the turtle could find his food very close to the surface of the earth. So this small neck of its turtle was quite suitable if it is could manage to find food on the surface. However, on different islands, let's say in the Pinta and the Rhode Island, the availability of food is a little bit higher as compared to the availability of food on the Isabel Island. So now, in order to reach the food, the organism, this turtle, they developed longer necks. So so one can say that it is the availability of the food, and to avoid the probably the predators, the structure of the food, the shell, the crust, outer crust also changed. So he also studied the finches, the birds which are on the Galapagos Island. So he came up that the different birds, they have a different kind of beak structure. So depending on what the reason was, so he could identify different categories. So there were fruit eaters, insect eaters, cactus eaters, and the seed eaters. Now, depending on what kind of food they are eating, their size of the beak was different. So let's say, for instance, in the fruit eaters, they have a parrot-like beak, which is a little bit pointed, and it was a broader one. So altogether, this was a vegetarian tree finch. So other insects, which are other finches, which were insect eaters, they are either having grasping beaks, which could hold on the insects, or they may be having probing beaks. So one can see the variation in the size of the beak. So depending on what kind of insects they are feeding on, if they are easily available, then they are having small beaks. If they are into the crevices of the trees, if they have to dig a hole, so they have these woodpecker-like finches. So their beaks are really pointed and strong. So another, they were cactus eaters. So these cactus eaters, they have longer and broader beaks, so that they can avoid the spines which are present on the surface of the cactus. And some of the finches, they were ground finches. So these ground finches, they were surviving on the seeds. So now, since these seeds, they usually have a hard crust. Because of this hard crust, so those finches which are surviving on those hard crust seeds, they need to have strong beaks so that they can crush the hard shell and get access to the fruit. So these finches develop small but strong beaks. So in a way, Darwin came up with the feature that adaptation is the thing, or it is the requirement which is allowing the organisms to better survive in the particular environment. So this was a kind of investigation where the concept of adaptation was clearly evident. So Darwin also observed fossils and different geological evidences that support the Earth. So during his journey period, he could also manage to gather several specimens which were fossilized. So he could gather that these fossils, they were also having some kind of similarities. So these fossils, they were the evidence of species, how they could have changed over the time. So these fossils also suggest that the structure of the uh, present time organisms, that is the organisms which are present during the Darwin's time. So these structures could also be having some or the other resemblance with those organisms. So he also said that depending on the availability of the fossils, he also supported the theory that the earth is very old. So according to the religious belief, it was only 4,000 to 6,000 years old. But he also came up with the concept that it's not like that. The earth is much older as compared to the religious beliefs which were prevailing at that particular time. So the Darwin also said, he also supported the theory of graduation. He also said that he liked the earth, organisms must have changed gradually over time. So looking at the different kind of fossils, we could say that the organism might have changed or might have evolved with respect to time. So then he came up with the theory of natural selection. So several key insights led to Darwin's idea for natural selection. So this is one of the key ideas that he gave about this theory of natural selection. So first of the point was the artificial selection. So it is the process by which humans change a species by breeding it for certain traits. So here Darwin compared what he learned about breeding to this idea of adaptation, and said that in nature, environment creates selective pressure instead of humans in artificial selection. So humans, so depending on the requirement, humans, they could do artificial selection. So similar to that, the nature itself was creating different kind of pressure. So that pressure could be because of the environmental conditions that are prevailing. So either it could be high temperature, it could be less or more availability of water, and the availability of the food. So depending on what the availability of the resources, it could exert some kind of pressure on the organism. So that pressure could lead to a different kind of adaptation, a different kind of change that could occur into that particular organism. However, artificials, human can do that, and that's the same kind of could have occurred into the nature as well. So the natural selection, it could have occurred by mechanisms where the environment is the selective agent. So the environment itself was exerting that kind of pressure that the organisms could have changed. So Darwin's, it's not only that he used only his theory, he also read the work which has been done by other people, and he developed his theory. So he said that the adaptations arose over generations. It's not that the adaptations could have occurred in 50, 20 or 100 years. They could have been arisen over the thousands of years, or in some cases some millions of years. So this process is called the descent with modifications. So these different kind of changes could have occurred over millions of years. So this is a kind of typical diagram where it is shown that how different kind of organisms they could have come up from different ancestors. These generations could have been over millions of years.